Much, and thank you so much for the invitation. Really moved by the words of my co-panelists before me. I don't want to be redundant, and I just want to address some sort of like new and novel points that hopefully enrich the conversation. So I'll first lead off as a law scholar. I'm somebody who studies due process, studies the First Amendment here in the United States, and some technical observations that were observed by my preceding speakers. We clearly see an infringement, not only an infringement, but a complete erosion and decimation of justice with regard to fair trials taking place in Kashmir and Jammu as a consequence of what the Indian regime has unleashed. No due process, the use of secret evidence, the leverage of the war on terror and the terrorism framing to essentially arrest individuals without any modicum of evidence. And these individuals who are being arrested and detained, are kind of like run the gamut of the most vulnerable segments of society. There's arrest of minors, elders, politicians, activists, journalists on the ground, again, being imprisoned for indefinite periods and being detained, as Mrs. Ward just mentioned, under the most sort of precarious conditions, given that we have COVID and the perils associated with COVID being intensified within the confines of, carceral spaces. So that's the technical sort of analysis that I have, is that there's no sort of esteem, no sort of respect for the very cornerstones of democracy in Jammu and Kashmir by a nation that sort of, anoints itself as being the largest democracy in the world, clearly contradicting itself in its activity in Jammu and Kashmir. But beyond this technical analysis of denying these basic human and civil rights to the residents of Jammu and Kashmir, there's something far broader going on and something far more nefarious going on in that these detentions serve a broader purpose. And the purpose here with India obviously is imperial and it's authoritarian, that it's using these arrests and using these detentions to crush morale, to suppress free speech, to prevent and abort dissent, to prevent activism on the ground by individuals on the outside. So it's critical for us to view these arrests and these detentions as sort of a broader authoritarian tool being used by the Indian regime to absolutely crush any efforts or any modicum of self-determination and resistance on the part of the people of Kashmir. And that is a tactic that authoritarian regimes have used for a long time. We clearly see that taking place in China, for instance, where en masse detentions are, in part a tool to arrest, but also detain individuals that the state fears, but also, again, to suppress the spirit and the will of the people to resist tyranny and to resist authoritarian government. And that's what purpose these detentions serve in the broader sort of lens. Beyond the scope of detention, one thing I can address, and hopefully Professor Sethi can address this as well, being in the United States, is one thing that really distresses me and really disappoints me is the lack of coverage Kashmir as a broader struggle receives here in the United States. And there is little consciousness, there is little cognizance, people in the United States, and I'm talking within human rights and social justice and racial justice circles, have of what's going on in Kashmir and Jammu. This is an issue that has been severely neglected. It's an issue that receives little media attention in the mainstream here in the United States. Also receives little attention amongst law scholars, but also law activists in the United States. And one thing that I've been pushing for as an activist, but also as a public commentator, is to you make the issue in Kashmir and Jammu more focal as not only a human rights issue, but also an issue of contemporary imperialism and the threats of Hindutva populism beyond the boundaries of India. So getting this issue on the radar and getting it to register with activists, lawyers, advocates on the ground has been something that has been a commitment of mine for the last several years. And beyond just getting it to be on the register and the radar of individuals on the ground, activists and advocates in the United States, it's critical to view Kashmir as part and parcel of this broader objective of the Modi regime to spread Hindutva supremacy, Hindutva bigotry, beyond the bounds of India. And I'm somebody who studies Islamophobia, and you can see the Islamophobic dimensions of what the Modi regime is doing in Kashmir and in Jammu. So this is part of a far broader project. What the political prisoners are experiencing and enduring is only one sliver and one dimension of what the Modi regime is using as an instrument to not only occupy, but to really suppress and really strip the people of Jammu and Kashmir of their will to resist, of their spirit to fight against, a growing regional and global superpower. And it's really critical for individuals here in the United States, like myself, to speak up and to raise consciousness amongst individuals with, authority and with some influence in the United States. So I'll stop there, and I'm excited to hear from the other panelists, and I'm excited to field any questions you might have at